Hello everyone, welcome back to Gardening with the Landscape Connection. My name is Michelle. I live in Northern Illinois, Zone 5. Today we are going to talk about Clematis. I get asked about Clematis all the time. They are among the most popular and attractive flowering plants out there. It is a vine, believe it or not, and there are a couple new ones out there by proven winners that are non-vining that we'll talk about as well. Clematis can greatly vary. There are so many different species out there. There are different forms, different shapes, different colors, different blooming seasons. Most of them bloom in early spring. Some of them bloom in the fall. Some of them bloom in the summer, but most of them in the spring. But it really depends on what type you choose as to when it's going to bloom. So we're going to talk about some of the basic requirements of all Clematis, and we will talk about some pruning tips, we'll talk about some plant care, and we'll talk about just what you can do to have beautiful, great looking Clematis. So first I would tell you, do some research. There are so many different kinds of Clematis to choose from. They come in a wide variety of heights, bloom times, flower forms, colors, and rather than just going to the garden center and picking out that one that you see and you go, oh, I want that one, do a little research so it's going to do what you want it to do when you get it home. There are different flowering times from spring, summer, and fall. There are reblooming types, and there are also types that bloom really late in the season, and there are types that bloom and they don't need anything to climb on. They are what we call a non-vine Clematis. So the biggest thing is the flower styles also vary. You can have that big star-like single to really frilly doubles, delicate miniatures, and even lovely bell-shaped blossoms. So there is a big variety out there. Then you've got all the different colors. I mean, there's white, pink, red, burgundy, lavender, deep purple, medium purple, variegated, some that are two-tone, some that are double, some that are singles. There's even yellow. And if you have the space, consider planting two side by side so that they'll intermingle together, and then you'll have this really cool looking thing going on as well. As you can see here, I kind of got two that are starting to intermingle together with the light lavender and the deeper, darker purple. So you can create that look as well if you've got the room to do it. So vines. Vines climb in several different ways. Some have twining stems like morning glories, or they'll have tendrils like sweet peas. Others have adhesive pads like ivy, or they'll have a clinging root system like climbing hydrangeas. Clematis, they use their leaf stems, which are able to coil like tendrils, kind of like a pea tendril that curls around something. Let me see if I can find one with some tendrils. So you know how sometimes you grow the vines and they'll have the tendril that'll come out all by itself. But the leaf structure itself on the Clematis is what is going to wrap around whatever you grow it up. And that's the thing. They need something to grow up. Now, some of these tendrils can be relatively short, and they can only wrap themselves around something that's probably less than a 1/4 inch in diameter. So that's important to remember when it comes time to pick your trellis out for them to grow on. Otherwise, you might help train them up whatever it is that you're growing. Now, they're pretty long-lived, so you want to make sure wherever you're going to plant them, you choose a good location for them. They don't really like to be moved, so choosing that plant site is important, so do it carefully. The ideal location will have well-draining soil. It's going to have nice, rich, loamy soil, and if it doesn't, you're going to make sure that maybe you mound the soil up and create an area for them that's like that. If possible, find a spot where the root zone will stay relatively cool, or you can underplant something underneath it. You can mulch it because the roots want to be cool while the plant wants to be in the sun. They need 6+ hours of sun, and sometimes they need to be protected from that hot afternoon sun. So see what I mean about finding the right site? There's so many things that you want to consider when you're doing this. If the planting area is more open, plan to mulch that soil with some kind of mulch at the bottom. You want to keep the mulch a few inches away though from the bottom of the stem. So you kind of want to mulch around the bottom of the stem, and then it'll grow up, and that will help keep it cool. The one thing that I like to do with my Clematis, if I can't get the roots in the shade, is I will underplant them with an annual or some kind of low growing perennial to create that shade for me. So where are some good places to choose to grow a Clematis? Well, you can grow it against a wall, though not under an overhang where it won't get any rain unless you're going to go out there and water it all the time. So you can grow it up a wall, on a fence. Right here, this is just a trellis that we built on 2x4s around a raised bed. And so we have clematis growing all down this trellis at all different ones. You could plant it near a shrub or a small tree and use that as the support for the clematis. You could grow it with another vine, like a climbing rose, and let it like wind its way through that rose over an arbor or pergola. And that's one of the ones where you want to look and see how big does it get. Is it going to grow as large or as long as I want it to, or is it one of the shorter cultivars? So make sure you're looking at that tag to find out how big it's actually going to get. They grow great along the top of a stone wall or on top of a fence. They also will do really well on a freestanding trellis. And again, make sure that you look at what size your clematis gets when you choose how big your trellis needs to be. The other thing is it grows great along a lamppost or a mailbox. And what I've done in both of those situations is I have just put mesh up along the pole on both the mailbox and the lamppost, and then it clung to the chicken wire or the mesh or the hardware cloth as it grew up, and then it ended up covering that and you never saw it. So the other thing is they do pretty good in a container too. Now, if you're going to overwinter it in the container, try to find a clematis that's 2 zones higher in cold temperature than the zone that you live in, so that it'll overwinter in the container, and make sure that your container has some substance to it so that it can insulate those roots through the winter. Okay, so just some quick facts about clematis. So the botanical name is clematis. All right, they can go anywhere from 3 to 12 feet, and they can spread anywhere from 3 to 20 feet. So that's pretty big, and they range in all of those sizes. So again, read your tags. I can't emphasize that enough. They want full sun, and soil requirements are pretty neutral, although they do better in a little bit higher pH. They'll do okay in regular pH as well. They pretty much grow in zone 4 through 9. So most of your cultivars are going to be in that range. Again, check your tag to make sure that it is 4 through 9 and you're not like in a zone 3 and you're trying to plant the clematis and make it come back, because it probably won't happen. And then the best time to plant your clematis is spring and fall. I have planted them in the summer, but I find that I have to protect them a little bit, and I do have to cut them back when I'm planting a little bit later in the year so that they don't stress as much. Now, there are probably over 300 species of clematis out there. There's really only a small number of them, though, that we actually use in the home gardens. And so, yes, you do want to buy something that is visually appealing to you, but you also want to make sure it's going to meet the requirements of what it is that you're growing and where you're growing, thus all of the things that I just talked about just a minute ago. Some people think growing clematis can be kind of confusing. I actually think if you know some basic things about them, they're relatively easy to grow. I planted this fence line up about, when did we open this back area? I guess we're going into year 4. So these are going into year 4 too. And there's not a whole lot with clematis that you can do that will actually kill them, unless like you don't water them, you know, basic stuff like that. I have actually cut every one of these to the ground and I didn't kill them. Now, I lost blooms on some of them this year because I did cut them back to the ground to kind of give them a nice fresh start. But the ones that are blooming, they're doing great. Now, some clematis have a pretty good tolerance of heat, but if you are in like a really super hot, humid area, they might need some protection from that hot afternoon sun. Here, this is getting all morning exposure, and the sun actually travels this way over the top of this. So I have a table right here that I have perennials on, so it does shade my base really well. And then this is all in the sun, and then the sun travels over, so they're getting sun from like 6 a.m. until about, it doesn't really start shading it until about 1. So they're getting a lot of really good morning sun. I don't have any in the hot afternoon sun, but I have grown them on my mailbox at my house, and they've done perfectly fine in that situation here in zone 5. Now, as far as watering goes, at planting, clematis should be watered in really super well. Consistent moisture levels will be essential during that very first year to develop that healthy, robust root system. Once they're established, clematis flowers will require at least 1 inch of water a week, maybe a little bit more if the temperatures really soar, like up into the 90s, and then they're hanging out there for a long time. They definitely will need some protection from the sun if it jumps into the 90s and the hundreds, or you're in an area that's really dry. You're probably going to have to supplement the water as well. Keep a rain gauge in your garden if you're somebody that doesn't get a lot of rain, or somebody that does get a lot of rain, so that you can kind of pay attention to how much rain you're getting. We get enough rainfall here that every once in a while I might have to supplement the water on these, but for the most part, they really do well all by themselves. Unless we go like 6 to 8 weeks without rain, then I'm having to really supplement the water on these. Now, again, the soil I'll talk about. They want well draining soil. They're not going to sit in a pool of water. They're not going to sit in, they don't do great in heavy clay. They need to be amended with some compost or something that's going to give them those rich nutrients and that ability for the water to drain through. They really want acidic, not slightly acidic soil, but they'll grow in neutral too. The best pH is probably 6.5 to 7. But you know what? I didn't do anything to this soil here. It's just normal pH, and they're growing just fine. All right, fertilizer. Now, I do fertilize mine when I first put them in, and I do fertilize mine first thing in the spring. You don't have to do that though. I just use a balanced fertilizer. I'm going to run and get it. I'll be right back. Okay, so when I put these in, I use the Garden Special from Fertilome, and it's 11-15-11 fertilizer. It's a good balanced fertilizer, and it's got both slow release and quick release properties to it. So I put this in when I planted them, and then I fertilize them again in the spring with this, and that's about all I do as far as fertilization goes. And some people will tell you you never have to fertilize them, so there's that too. Now, since they are vines, clematis plants require some kind of support in order to kind of guide their growth as they're growing. The types of support systems are usually dependent on which type you're growing. So for instance, poles can be acceptable if you're growing a really small clematis, which only goes like 2 to 5 feet. But if you're growing maybe a bigger one that's going to grow 8 to 12 feet, that might require an arbor or a trellis, something that can support the growth habit of that plant. Now, most varieties, however, do quite well growing along a trellis or a fence. But I do want to talk about the clematis that Proven Winners came out with. So this is the Proven Winners clematis. As you can see here, it's got this like downturned flower on it. Aren't they beautiful though? This one here is the Stand By Me clematis, and it's going to grow 34 to 38 inches high. And this is a non-vining type of clematis. So they are going to maybe need a hoop or another plant to help hold it up, because it will flop over at 3 feet if you don't have something to support it. Now, this is pretty thin in itself in this pot right now, but it will fill out if you plant it in the ground. Now, it's got those bell-shaped flowers on it, and they are saying that this is a non-vining herbaceous clematis that dies back to the ground at the end of the growing season. So if that's something that you're looking for, Proven Winners has started selling these. We have them in our store. I don't know that I'm going to plant one. I do know Laura from Garden Answer has them planted in her landscaping. So if you want to see a good example of that, you'll probably be able to check that out in one of her tours. But it does have that beautiful lavender bell-shaped flower on it. So there you go. That's a non-climbing clematis. All right. Now let's talk about pruning, because pruning is the one thing everybody's scared to death of. They are afraid to prune, or they don't know how to prune, or they don't know what to prune, or they don't know what kind of clematis they have. And so we're going to talk about the 3 different kinds of clematis. They group them into group 1, group 2, group 3. No fancy names or anything like that, but there are 3 groupings of this. And you know what? Sometimes it can be confusing if you're not sure when to cut your clematis back. Now, there really isn't a whole lot that you can do that will kill the clematis in the pruning department. You might cut off flowers. You might cut off next year's blooms. You might, cut off something that you're not supposed to. But if you don't mess the root up, it will grow back, and you might not get flowers for 2 years, but you're going to have a hard time killing it just by pruning it. There are 3 general groups of clematis vines, and each has their own best time to prune them. So what you need to do is you need to know what kind you have first, and that might take you watching your clematis for a little bit to know what to do. Okay, so let's talk about group one. So group one are the ones that bloom in early spring, and I don't have any of those growing here. I only have group two and group three, but I will talk about group one. So group one, more times than not, you don't have to prune them at all. They don't need any help whatsoever. They generally are going to grow on old wood, and then they're going to form their flower buds during the summer. And if you are pruning on them, it's probably because you are wanting to control their size. And when you do prune them, what you should do is follow the stem back to the next set of healthy buds that are forming. Follow those back, and that way you'll know where to prune it. And if you're going to prune it, you should prune it right when they're done flowering. So if this was spring right now and these were done flowering, if I wanted to prune on it, I would do that right after it's done flowering. But for the most part, I think those you can leave alone and just let them grow, and only prune them if there's dead, diseased, or damaged stems on there, or you're trying to control the size. Okay, so the next ones are group two. That's what these are right here. These are considered a group two clematis, and they bloom in early summer. Right now it's a little bit late because I did cut these back to the ground, so they took a minute to catch back up and bloom. Now these will bloom on old wood and new wood, and this is the most common type that you're going to see out there. A lot of them have those large flowering hybrid flowers on them. The best time of the year to prune them is actually in early spring before they bloom. And what you're going to do again is you're going to follow the stem back and look for a bud and cut right above that bud. And then you're also looking again for the 3Ds. Any disease, damaged, or dead branches, you would prune those out as well. Now the other thing you can do is you can prune out tangled stuff as well. I like to use the little mini trimmers because these are easy to use, and you want to make sure that you clean your pruners in between plants with alcohol, so that if you do have any kind of disease whatsoever, you're not spreading that around. Keep that love off your plants and clean your pruners in between their cuts, or in between. I don't clean them in between every cut, but I do clean them in between each individual plant. All right, and then there's group three. So group three are those that bloom from midsummer well into fall. They're the ones like the Sweet Summer Love. That's what I have here. This is the one that gets the little white blooms all over it in fall. They're very vigorous, very beautiful. And if you want to cover something fast and have a fall bloomer, these are white and they're gorgeous. They bloom only on new wood, so they can actually be cut back hard in late winter or early spring to like within 6 inches of the ground, and then they'll flush again new the next year. So these are a great one to grow because you can rejuvenate that whole vine every single year. I know it seems radical, but they actually do better if you clear out all that old growth and start them fresh every year with new fresh growth. So those are the ones that bloom late in the summer or early fall. Okay, I hope I'm showing you this right, but basically what you're gonna do, if you've got a group 2 clematis, you're gonna prune 6 to 8 inches of this clematis off. And what you do is you follow the stem back, and you see right here, see the 2 bumps where that nice healthy leaf is? You're gonna cut it right above, if I can get in there, you're gonna cut it right above that, and then you can just pull this piece out right here. I just pulled some nice buds off of there because this one's not done blooming, but I wanted to show you where you cut that from. When you're going to prune it. Now, one of the things that I would highly recommend that you do, and a lot of people don't do this, is no matter what kind of clematis you're growing, they should be cut back to about 6 inches from the ground during that first late winter or early spring after you planted it. This actually will make your plant more full and healthy in years to come and create a better habit. You can do a second year pruning to encourage your plant to be even fuller and produce many more blooms, but it's not necessary. But I'm telling you, that first year one that you do is so important. You will create this crazy healthy plant if you do that. To do the second year prune, just cut everything back to 5 inches. No need to look for growing buds. Clematis vines are very forgiving. They're generally very root hardy. If you make a mistake, it may take a couple years to recover, but you should be fine after that. Don't be afraid to prune them. Even if you make a mistake, you won't kill them by pruning at the wrong time. At worst, like I said, at worst, you might not have blooms for 1 year as they recover from being cut back. So don't be afraid to prune your clematis. Okay, so now let's talk about the not fun part. Let's talk about problems that you can have with clematis, because you know what? You can have some problems. They're prone to several types of foliar disease. Among these are clematis wilt. So infected plants will just wilt rapidly. They'll die back to the ground. They'll collapse, and that's it. They're dead. And you know what? Clematis wilt seems to affect more of the large flowered clematis varieties than the small variety or the small flowered varieties. They include basically blackened, shriveled foliage or leaf stalks and leaf spot. The stems may be blackened inside when you split them open and look at them. So basically, if you do see that going on, your best preventative is to cut out any infected foliage, even if you have to cut them all the way back to the ground and start over. Make sure your cutters are sharp. Make sure you sterilize with your alcohol in between plants so you don't move that around to another plant. So make sure your cutters are clean in between plants. I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, and then you can get leaf spot. Now don't confuse leaf spot with clematis wilt. Leaf spot are those spots that you get all over your plant. A lot of times you cause them. So what happens is either they have really poor airflow, or they have too moist of conditions in the soil, and so then you get a fungus, and the fungus is what causes the wilt, or the leaf spot. So if you can get better airflow and let them dry out in between waterings, or control that watering, or make sure they have good drainage, or whatever it is you need to do so that they're not sitting in wet water, you can control that all on your own. So some of that's just a matter of paying attention to what's going on with your clematis plant. The other thing that will help with that is when you are watering your clematis, water at the base and try not to get the leaves wet. So they're not a great plant to water with an overhead sprinkler. Okay, the next problem that you can have is root rot. And again, this is caused by a fungus that's in the soil, and it's usually caused because we overwater or we don't have good drainage, and it can be totally prevented by providing your clematis with good drainage. Visible symptoms include dying or wilting foliage, or the foliage is turning yellow. And more times than not, when you see yellow foliage on anything, it's usually from either overwatering, poor drainage, or it needs some nitrogen. If you have root rot, the main clematis stem may appear darker around the soil line. Infected roots will appear black or brown. They also might smell. Basically, what you're going to do is cut away infected roots and dispose of that infected soil, and then replant your clematis in fresh soil with better drainage someplace else, or in the same spot if you can make the drainage better. Then the most common problem that you're going to find on your clematis, especially in places that have higher humidity, is powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is basically that film that you get on the leaves, and it thrives when it's hot and dry during the day, and then it's cold and wet at night. So when you're looking at powdery mildew, I like to stay ahead of it. I like to take my chives. I will boil water, turn the water off, cut my chives, steep them down in that water overnight, and then I strain them out, put it in a sprayer, and I use that chive water to spray my clematis, and I spray these, and I spray my monarda, I spray my peonies, anything that I think is going to be prone. Phlox is another one to powdery mildew, and I try to stay ahead of it, and for me that seems to work really well. Neem oil is another one that you can use. It is an organic, and for this here, this is a ready-to-use spray bottle. A lot of different companies make neem oil, and it's for organic gardening, but it controls black spot, powdery mildew, spider mites, aphids, whiteflies, other insects. So it does a lot of different things. So horticultural oils are another thing that you can use to spray on your plants. I try to be more of a preventative with this. The one thing you'll find with horticultural oils, though, is once the temperature gets above 85 degrees, you really don't want to be spraying this oil on your plant. So to help prevent powdery mildew, again, it comes down to cultural practices. Good airflow on your plants is really crucial to making sure that you don't get a lot of the diseases that we just talked about. Fortunately, most of these issues can be controlled, without losing your plant. So there are so many things out there. The pests that actually like your clematis the most are going to be spider mites and aphids. Aphids you'll find on the tips of the new growth. They like to eat that. And again, you can use the horticultural oils. You can use the insecticidal soaps. If you have caterpillars eating on your plants, then you can use BT. All of those are going to be an organic solution for you. So Espoma makes a good insect soap here. It's an organic that you can spray on your product. Also, Bonide makes a Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. This is also an organic that you can use. And then BT is one that you can use. It's a natural chemical found in nature, and you can use this as well. It targets caterpillars. So any of those you can use are an organic solution versus grabbing that chemical that is a synthetic. Although you can use those as well. I choose not to, but they're out there. You can use them. So although many clematis vines are grown in containers, which they can be, make sure again, if you're going to grow in a container, you're 2 zones above the zone that you're in, and that you overwinter it in a thick enough container that it can handle being out there. I like to plant mine right in the ground. Again, you want to plant them in fall or early spring, depending on where you are. And there are so many rewarding things about clematis. I love them. Oh, I just think it is a great plant. I think they're easy to grow once you're not afraid of them, or you're not afraid to prune them. Because remember, you can make a mistake and it's okay. They are very forgiving. I really don't have to do a whole lot to them once they're established. I water them every once in a while. That's about it. You know, I don't do a lot of pruning on them, but you certainly can. Again, I water mine and make sure that they get that inch of water once a week. If it's not raining, I'm not getting that. I do try to water deeply and less often versus every day. Every day watering kind of promotes that shallow root system, and I really want that nice deep root system. And again, make sure that you're cooling those roots off with either underplanting something at the base, or you are mulching them with fresh mulch every spring, and make sure to pull it a little ways away from the stem. So that's about all I know about clematis. I bet you there's more, but that's all I know. And I hope this was helpful. And thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next video. Keep on gardening. We're checking out for today.